So obviously, JavaScript's been getting better and better, right? All of the sort of the ES flavors are doing awesome. And Cheng's talks about reason have been fascinating, right? And especially with WebAssembly around the corner as a potential sort of target, compilation target. Is it time to jump ship from JavaScript? At what point do we make the jump? Who wants to take that one?
I don't think we have the tools yet to do that.
Okay.
But maybe it will come one day in the future, right? The day we jump ship is the day that there's something that's soundly there for us to land on, which I don't think is there yet.
So I guess, I mean, we've all kind of tried to jump ship with sort of JavaScript compilation languages, right? With CoffeeScript and stuff, it almost happened. Do you think we couldn't do something? I mean, I'm picking on reason, but.
So I think there was one interesting question that Cheng didn't answer, which was, can we actually take all of the good parts of Reason and put them into JavaScript? And I think this is like one of the ideas of like React and React Conf and like the community is like, oh, we're going to explore like so many different variants, and then we're going to try to come to bring them back to like what actually people are using. And I think I view Reason as a very good like testing ground. So I have no idea, like I hope it's going to succeed, but I have no idea. But at least if it doesn't, then we should bring like all of the ideas and like all of the good things back to like the way we actually are writing now. And one of the things that's been there is like the type system. So like a lot of language have type system, and like they're actually really good for a lot of things. And so now with like TypeScript and Flow, we can get many of the advantages of type system inside of JavaScript. And now with ES6 modules, we can get static analysis like way easier using this. So
we've got acrobatics on stage as well.
Thanks.
Cool. So yeah, that kind of feels like it's been a theme over the last couple of years, right? Of just like good ideas from functional languages being ported down into JavaScript, and that just benefiting us as a whole, right? Cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a slow process. We've been working on, the Reason team at Facebook has been working on Reason for a couple of years now, and they've come a long way, but it's still not, I think, ready for everybody in this room to sit down and build their production applications with it. And people ask a lot about WebAssembly too, and we are very excited about WebAssembly. I think it will open some new doors, but right now it's missing a couple features which we would probably like to wait for, such as right now you basically can't interact with the DOM at all from WebAssembly, so that makes it hard to build web apps. But we're watching all of these technologies eagerly.
One other thing with React Native, what we've done is to be able to interrupt between JavaScript and the C world. And so anything that you shouldn't write with JavaScript today, you can like write in C and just like expose an API to JavaScript. And we've seen this like for React Native for apps, but we've also seen it for Node. Like a lot of like programs that have been usually written in C, like machine learning and all of those kind of things, are now able to be used by JavaScript.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So we've got our Slido questions. I'm going to read them out just on the off chance that any of our panel can't read. We've got a Redux question straight off the bat. Redux store for everything or just app state, i.e. not UI state? Dan, do you want to answer this one?
I guess just use it in a way that makes sense to you and your application. Like, this is what I've been trying to say for a long time. We actually have a very good frequently asked questions sections on the Redux website, which I'm very thankful to all the contributors. This is not something that, like, I wrote most of the docs, but this is the one that's contributed by the community. And I think it answers this question really well. I don't think you should put everything in the Redux store. Like, this kind of extreme idea of what if everything was an action? What if everything was reflected in a single object? I think it's kind of like a little bit too extreme for like most applications, unless they're small or middle-sized. So obviously, this is not something that would work for like Facebook.com. So I think we're mostly like on the React team, we're mostly interested in how do we bring the benefits of this kind of like Redux-like approach to components and to make this set state API better, and maybe have better dev tools for that as well. So I don't know if this really answers the question, but I don't think there is a definite answer. We'll see.
Not just abandon all Redux, go set state all the way.
We'll see. I don't know. I mean, it's like, so with Fiber, it's not super clear how we're going to, so with Fiber, different state updates might have different priorities. It's likely that they're going to be implicit, so it's not something you specify, but rather the library infers from like where that set state call is, like is it inside an event handler or inside an AJAX request or something like this. So it's not super clear how to integrate this priority system with React Redux bindings. And obviously, we'll figure something out with the community. But yeah, we'll see. So I would just say that if you're like really interested in trying the async stuff in Fiber as soon as we release it, then for these parts, for these components, it's probably better to use set state just so that you can use those APIs immediately if they become available. But yeah, you can, I'm sure we'll work something out with the larger community using React Redux, MobX, and all the different state management libraries.
Speaking of MobX, oh no, it's just dropped down. Okay, we'll come back to that. We're bound to get questions like, when's the next React or something? Any updates on Relay 2?
I'll take that one since I've been working on that. So Relay 2 will come probably very long off from now. But the good news is that Relay 1.0 will come really soon, which is to say that what we don't want to do is completely rebuild everything from scratch and relaunch it. What we want to do is innovate in place. So we've been spending a lot of time at Facebook with a lot of new ideas and figuring out how to fold those in to the Relay that we have. And I'm excited to start sharing a lot of that stuff externally really soon. In fact, I think we have some conference talks at upcoming conferences specifically about the modern new pieces of Relay that we have coming out. So more on that soon, definitely within the next couple months.
Very cool. I doubt the rest of you can say much more than that if you've got conference talks coming up, right? Nah, it's fine. MobX versus Redux. Discuss.
So
smiley face, by the way.
Smiley face.
Yeah.
So I think this is in large part a stylistic preference. I think that MobX and Redux both clearly work really well for a ton of people, and you can build production applications in either one, and people seem happy building production applications in both. And so a large part of it is just what do you personally prefer, and some of that comes down to, do you prefer a more immutable style versus mutating things in place? And then I think MobX also leans a little more towards code that looks simple, whereas Redux leans more towards code that might look a little more complex up front, but then hopefully will save you a little time debugging down the road. And where the right trade-off for that is definitely depends on your application. I think that at Facebook, we've found that that using immutable data passing tends to work pretty well for gigantic applications, but that trade-off might be different for smaller things.
Do you think there are like certain types of applications that would be more suited to one library or the other?
I personally don't feel like I know
just purely personal
enough to give a great answer to that.
Excellent. All right. Would you pick Redux sagas for handling Redux side effects today? Is there a better choice? Oh, that's a good question.
I guess I'd have to answer because, like, I'm sorry that there's so many questions about Redux, but I think Redux Saga is cool. I've never really gotten a chance to use any of those like Redux ecosystem libraries because I created Redux and then I spent several months writing the documentation and examples, And then I joined Facebook and started working on React. So it's hard for me to give recommendations. I think there is a lot of, again, community resources about like blogs and articles from people who are happy with Redux Saga and who find its testability very useful. But I know there is also some feedback from people who say that this is a DSL you have to learn, that generators are not really like obvious to a lot of people because if you're not familiar with this language construct from other languages or from JavaScript itself, it can be really complicated to understand what's going on. I know that most people who have to handle complex side effects in Redux apps go either for Redux Saga or Redux Observable. So I think these are two good choices, and which one is better for you depends on whether you're more comfortable with generators or observables.
It must be very dependent on just the complexity of your application as well.
Complexity of the application, the kind of abstractions that the team is comfortable with, the kind of async flows you have, your stylistic preference.
So in a similar vein of pick a library, where is styling heading of React Apps heading? Where is styling of React Apps heading? I can't keep up with it. Styles in JS or CSS modules.
Yeah. So yeah, this is one of those, all of those things are interesting because so what's interesting at Facebook is we built all of those libraries in order to solve concrete use cases that we had. And so style in JS started with React Native. So I didn't want to re-implement all of the CSS cascading and everything. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to try and use pure JavaScript objects and see how it goes. And I was convinced that at some point I would have to implement the full CSS spec. And it turned out the more we went, the more I realized that, oh, actually this is working well, and it's actually solving a lot of issues we had with CSS. And the talk CSS in JS, the reason for it is a PR management issue. So when we announced React, everybody was focused on JSX. And nobody cared about React. It was JSX, 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 JSX. And I didn't want the same to happen for React Native. And I knew that if we were going to put styles in JavaScript, everybody would freak out and nobody would care about React Native. And so I found a small conference a few months earlier, and I was like, okay, so this is this thing, just get some drama for 2 days or 3 days, and then it's going to die. But it didn't. Everybody took on and there's tens of libraries around it. All the people say that I don't know how to write CSS and blah blah blah. And so then we looked back at Facebook, and so we had this way of writing styles in JavaScript for React Native, and it's working really well. And then we looked at our PHP stack, and we already have solutions. So if you look at my site CSS in JS, we have this CX component, which gives many of the benefits of CSS in JS. And so there's actually not a lot of reasons to switch to this. And so at this point at Facebook, we have two solutions for those two worlds that are actually working well for us. And so we're unlikely going to start coming up with another one or adopt something else from the outside. And so now, this is a bit tricky because we've talked about the idea and there's no actual solution coming from us on the web. And this is the same for many of other libraries. Redux, we've been using Flux and we were happy about it, and then outside of Facebook came out with Redux. But so I think it's going to be the same. It's going to be up to you, the community, to figure out which way is working the best for you, and pick a winner and then make it the standard. But one thing I want to be careful about is you don't have to use the latest and greatest, like the latest that comes in order to be productive. Like I would say, like pick one and just roll with it, and it's going to be fine. And if you're like getting stuck, like most of the libraries are not like binding. Like unlike many other frameworks, like once you use it, like you're stuck forever. With many of those libraries, you're like, oh, you can like just like start replacing it with something else if it doesn't work out for you. So, yeah, my take on this.
Out of interest, when you're writing sort of new React components within Facebook, what kind of styling systems are you currently using, or is it kind of rolled into what was kind of?
It's basically a homegrown version of CSS modules, where we have separate CSS files, and then we have a extension to CSS that lets us namespace our class names, and that sort of automatically manages the dependencies, but it's basically CSS modules.
Cool, okay. At least that kind of style of thing.
For now.
What question would you have asked to the panel of Dan?
Can I think on this a little more and maybe ask it later? I don't know.
Sure, fine by me.
So can I ask a question to Lee? So I've seen on Twitter that you actually spent like a few weeks working on Immutable. And can you tell me a bit more, like how do you manage like those kind of open source projects? What are the challenges? And
Oh, yeah. The challenges. It's crazy. So Immutable is a really interesting case because I built it at a time when I needed it, and then I shifted my own personal attention. However, many teams at Facebook and outside of Facebook still use that library. So I'll come back to it occasionally to work closely with the team when they need something, but otherwise I tend to veer off. So enough time and attention had sort of piled up where it was time to like refocus again. And one of the first things that I did was actually collect help, which is sometimes a difficult thing to do, especially if you don't know who to get help from. So what I did is I looked for teams at Facebook that were using Immutable and needed help themselves, and then asked for someone from those teams to help me out. Then I leaned on our open source team at Facebook, and I got someone from their team to help. So then there was 3 of us, and we went in and looked at all of the issues and pull requests, and then started to categorize them by area and figure out like what things do we need to focus on first. And almost half of the open pull requests or issues were related to type definitions, which was really surprising to me because it kind of is a sign of the times that when I built Immutable.js, TypeScript had just come out, and it was kind of an infant project. It wasn't clear if it was going to be big or not, and Flow wasn't even a thing yet. But today, both of those 2 tools are things people use all the time, and enough time had passed between the last kind of major spurt on improving Immutable.js and now that was the biggest gap. So almost all, there are some like minor improvements to the API, bug fixes, things like that, but the vast majority of the work was in improving the type definitions for both Flow and TypeScript. The majority of which actually came from the community. It was just a matter of making sure that all those community contributions worked together holistically and that all of the different bug reports coming in were all fixed by those. So that was a lot of overhead. Now we're at a spot where we have release candidates out. So actually, if you're using Immutable.js in production, please go check out the latest release candidate, pull it in, and see if it works in your code base. Because part of the thing that I want to do is make sure when this next major version lands that I can make some clean guarantees about how easy or hard it will be to upgrade. And that's what we're actually doing in Facebook now. So those release candidates came out a week or 2 ago, and there's now teams at Facebook that are using Immutable.js that are pulling the release candidates in and coming up with issues and bug requests, and we're going through just kind of the last tail of those.
Good question, Chris. Do you think progressive web apps can take over native apps? This is an interesting one. What's the bite?
No. I mean, and it pains me to say that, but as long as the platforms that we're dependent on have a vested interest in making native apps better than the web platform, that will be our reality. I spent a long time at Facebook trying to make web apps be the thing that would drive Facebook forward. And there was some like news articles a few years ago about how Zuck said the biggest mistake we ever made was HTML5, and my team drank that night. None of us got fired. It's all good. But I mean, part of that was like our own painful realization and talking with Mark and other folks on the Facebook team about what we had learned and like why that failed. And a lot of it was that we assumed, based on the very early years of the iOS platform, that the web would be a really important part of that platform. It was when Steve got up on stage and talked about it as an internet communicator, and then how do you build stuff for this? Well, you just build for the web. And we saw that trajectory and we wanted to get in early on it. And then Android was in its infancy when we started this work, and we thought, well, okay, Android is being pitched by Google, which is a web company, so it's going to be in their best interest to make this really great and then compete. And there's going to be competition about who can build a better web platform. This reality did not come to pass. Instead, actually, the web browsers on Android are even worse than the web browser on iOS, despite the fact that it's run by Google, who has the best web browser out there for desktops. That's shifting a little bit as Chrome browser for mobile gets on more devices, but you still can't count on the Chrome browser being there for a large majority of Android users. So at the end of the day, we needed to build apps at Facebook that supply a high-quality experience to as many people as possible, and we had to kind of like give up this idealistic view that a web app would be the right way to do that and focus on instead the tools that we had at our disposal to make that happen. And unfortunately, it meant kind of bifurcating what we were building across many different native platforms. Now, React Native is our attempt at trying to fold as much of that back as possible without giving up the quality that we've gotten from building native quality apps. That's still ongoing. I think we've largely succeeded, but there's a lot more to do. But I don't know. I mean, I would love for that future to come to pass, but I'm pessimistic. I don't want to be. Someone prove me wrong, please.
Yeah, one of the main design decisions around React Native was being able to have a renderer to the web. And this was like one of the very important goals, is like all of the design decisions we made, like can we polyfill what we're building for the web? And there's like this React Native web project, but like I really wanted to like come to fruition where like you can have the same code base and largely like share like 95% of your code, or like 90% or 80%, and like target like iOS, Android, and web. And one of the things I really want is like to equalize the landscape, because right now one of the issues like for Facebook is, and for many of you, like as I'm talking about with you, is if you want to like build an app like for mobile people today, you need to have like one iOS engineer, one Android engineer, one web engineer, and this is like such a waste of time, and like such a waste of money and resources and everything. But not only this, but it also incurs like some really bad incentives. For example, like when the Facebook was .com, was just a website, if I wanted something fixed, I could just like go in, hack it, and like ship it, and like within like the next few days going to be live. But now, if I want to do the same thing, now I need to like find someone on iOS, someone for Android, someone for web that's going to implement like all of those pieces. And this means that me, as an engineer, I'm less empowered to actually like build cool stuff. And now you need to have like some like product level management that comes in and say like, we need to organize this and everything. And so I think like this is like really hurting like us as developers like to build cool stuff. And this is mostly an invisible problem, because like if you're an iOS engineer, you don't see this problem because you're not seeing what the Android person is doing. And you're like, like I'm just doing this, it is the way it works. But we as web developers were like seeing way more, because now we are like stuck into this world where we can do only 1/3 of the job. So if anything, I would love like maybe not having one platform, but being way easier to like program for multiple platforms and like share code across all of them.
I'm going to throw my own question in the middle just for the fun of it. Related to that, obviously one of the big advantages of web platforms is being able to update the app straight away without going through an app store, right? One of the sort of slightly shady advantages of React Native was that ability to sort of push a JS bundle and have people's apps update outside of the App Store. And recently we had this kind of freak out, it seemed, on sort of Twitter and Facebook about somebody's app was blocked in the Apple App Store, and we weren't sure whether it was that updating process that caused it. Do you think this is still an advantage that React Native has?
So I would say that the ability to update code over the air that like Microsoft has shown with the code push service is really impressive and opens up a lot of doors, but also I would say that like we like to have a very good relationship with Apple and with Google, and I don't think that circumventing the App Store review process is a good way to go about that. That's how some people have described it, and so if you're considering this for your app, definitely don't think about it that way, because it will just come back and bite you in a few months or maybe a few years if you're lucky. But also, as far as I know, for all of the cases that you're talking about where somebody had an app rejected from the store, it was not anything related to React Native. It was other libraries that were dynamically calling into native iOS frameworks in a slightly different way than React Native is even able to do.
Yeah, it's not a shady feature at all. It's actually an awesome one. So actually, it's an important distinction, because when we were first talking about React Native, we knew that internally at Facebook, that was going to be the thing that everyone was really excited about. And we knew that it was explicitly something Apple was nervous about. It was not listed on their terms of service that you could explicitly do this. And so we needed to proceed with caution when we talked to our teams. And so the first versions of React Native that we were using internally did not have any kind of push over the air feature. And as a team, we weren't really talking about that with the product teams. But we knew that we wanted it ourselves, so we sought out to make that happen. Later, Apple actually changed their terms of service to explicitly say that it is OK to do this. So once we kind of got the OK from them, then we started to investigate this at a more deeper level. And now we have a service where we're pushing updates to our React Native apps all the time. And Microsoft built and operates Code Push, which is like a phenomenally awesome project that's like built at scale and is very much a first-class feature of what they're doing. So that's really awesome. But it is, to Ben's point, really important to understand the limits of what you can do with that, because especially coming from a web development background, because we're used to being able to update our entire applications over the air at any given point in time, because the platforms that we're building on top of tend to update very, very slowly, right? New features to web browsers come out every few years, if not every few months at the fastest. So we're not usually worried that much about breaking something by pushing a new update that week. However, with React Native apps, we're very often making native changes and JavaScript changes to our application, and you have to be really careful about making sure that you're doing that in a way that they still line up and you don't break things. So there's some more limitations to what you can do over-the-air updates with React Native than on a pure web platform, but it still gets you kind of 90% of the way there.
Basically, don't try and dynamically change native code.
Don't dynamically change native code. That one is explicitly against Apple's terms of service, and for very good reasons.
This is an interesting one, considering the library authors in the room. Animating in React sucks. Discuss.
So I'm super amused that in the time of the last two questions, this got onto the screen at 100 votes, and now it's at 365. So I guess we've failed you all somehow.
Apparently this sucks.
I think animating is something that is not really harder in React than it is in other environments, but everything else that isn't animating is so much easier that it feels like animating is really hard. And we actually have there's a number of libraries, some from our teams and some in the external community that try to make animation better, and a lot of them do a really good job at it. Christopher made one called Animated on React Native, which is particularly well received, and we've been meaning to bring it to the web for a while now.
It's on NPM.
It's
use it, but
secretly on NPM. We don't have a website or docs for it, and we keep meaning to make time on the React team to really polish that up and do a full announcement, and hopefully we'll be able to squeeze that in this year sometime.
Something that people could contribute to, maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, also you can make your own libraries. All of these even the animated library doesn't hook into the core of React in any special way. It's fully something that you yourself can build as well, and so it's a very nice library, but there's a good chance that you can build something better if you really put your mind to it. So you also don't need to wait for us if you would like to see something in particular built.
I have a question around Chenglu as a library called React Motion. And one of the biggest issue right now is all of the rendering is synchronous. So this means that if you're re-rendering like a big chunk, like it's going to like freeze, or you're going to. Is Fiber going to actually solve a lot of this, or is it out of scope for Fiber?
Yeah, so solving that sort of problem is one of our main goals with Fiber. The canonical example I use is if you're typing into some text box on a web page, and it just freezes because your browser is doing something else, and you keep typing and you don't see anything, and then a second later it goes and catches up. That's always because usually because the main thread was blocked running some other JavaScript. And so with Fiber, our idea is that we want to be able to split that work up more, and recognize that probably processing your keystroke or processing an animation is more important, and we want to prioritize that work to make sure that your experience stays smooth, and then the long-running work that's maybe related to something coming over the network, that can be pushed off by 100 milliseconds, and nobody will even notice. So hopefully, yes, that's definitely one of our goals.
So our next question, I think I remember you guys being asked something similar to this at React Europe. If Zuck came by tomorrow and wanted to completely rebuild Facebook.com, how would you guys approach it?
Well, we've already done this so many times in the past.
Yeah. First, I would tell him no. This is a terrible, terrible idea. I think actually this is the single biggest failure mode that any company can find themselves in, is when they stop the show to rebuild everything. Because they've made, I don't know, some super critical technology mistake or something, or they even just I don't like this programming language anymore, I want to use that one, so we're gonna hold the whole show so that we can port everything. It's the surest fire way to kill your company. But that said, Facebook today looks nothing like what it looked like a few years ago, and that looked nothing like what it looked like a few years before that. So we're constantly thinking about what we want it to look like, and then how to get there from where we are without ever breaking anything in the process. And one of my favorite aspects of this is years ago now, but when we replaced PHP with a completely different programming language and a completely different runtime for that programming language, without ever rewriting any of our code, which is a project called Hack and Hip Hop. So HHVM is the runtime for that. And that was very real problems. Hey, it's really hard to write high quality code in PHP. Hey, it's really hard to run a super efficient server at scale with the Zend engine. What are we going to do about it? And the first few versions of that were pretty wild, actually. The first one was taking PHP, reading it as an AST, converting that to C++, compiling the C++ code, distributing it to all our servers with BitTorrent, because we couldn't figure out how to get gigabytes of compiled C++ everywhere without BitTorrent, and then running that. That was an insane thing that somehow managed to actually work, and the the best thing about it was that the vast majority of engineers at Facebook had no idea that that project was even happening, or that when they shipped PHP code, they actually weren't shipping PHP code, they were shipping C++, even though they weren't writing C++. That was an intermediate step before they that same team wrote a virtual machine. And then once we had our own virtual machine, it let us fork the language and then start to introduce more features that let us build higher quality stuff, introduce type systems, do better asynchronous programming. So that's like one example of many examples of things that we've done over the years where we've like seen where we want to go and then tried to figure out like how do we make that happen without having to hold the whole world.
Insane incremental changes every time.
But there's also like more like we're going to rewrite the website, and Facebook has a tendency to be like one big thing, and we want to like write a lighter version of Facebook. So we've probably like built like 10 Facebook Lite version over the years, and I don't think any of them succeeded like at relaunching and like being successful. But one interesting aspect of Zeus is every single time we got like some new technological wins. Oh, is this? So for example, like one of the latest one is Relay. Like we wanted to rebuild the Facebook mobile website for tablets using React, and we needed like to have a data fetching. And so we actually like built Relay for this use case. And one of the interesting things about the reason why Zeus tend to fail, at least for Facebook, is not because of the technology, but because of the product. Because Facebook, like every single button has been like tailored by years, and like everything has been super A/B tested, and it's really hard to like reproduce all of those like small things that makes Facebook like really successful. And so my first project at Facebook was, I'm going to re-implement the photos part of your profile. So when you click on like the photos tab, and like it looks like crap, like I wonder like why people used it. And then like the first thing we've done is like, we got a designer, we made it like super beautiful and everything, and like speed was good and everything, but like it tanked like all the metrics. And when we looked at the details, we found like, there's an ugly like button on albums that like shouldn't be there, so we removed it. And then like putting it back actually like restored like many of the metrics we had. And so now this is like those kind of things where all of the app, like all of the users are like used to like, if there's a like button, they're going to click there. And then if you remove it, like now, like it's going to tank all of the metrics, and you don't want to ship something that like regress in metrics. And so now you need to find new ways to like figure out how to actually like replace this. And this is like relatively easy when you're doing it in place, because you can compare to the previous version. But now if you're rebuilding everything from scratch and then your metrics tanks, you have no idea why. It could be like, performance is not good, or it's missing a like button that I didn't know even existed. And so one of the things we're trying to do at Facebook now is whenever we are starting like something from scratch, we either try to rewrite the product part, so we redesign it, or we try to rewrite the tech. But we don't try to do them at the same time, because then we cannot compare to anything. So.
I think it's also interesting how this kind of ties with what we do with React itself. So So Fiber is like a complete re-implementation of React that we've been working on for some time. And it's interesting that, so obviously like we have unit tests that are like almost all of them are passing, and we have some integration tests. But it's also interesting how, so we ship both to production depending on, like we ship, I think, to 55% or something like that. Oh, it's, okay, it's 80 now. Yeah, so we ship Fiber to a lot of users, and sometimes this way we can catch some things that we wouldn't be able to catch otherwise. So, for example, we noticed that some of the metrics seem to go down for users who opted into Fiber, and we're not sure yet. Maybe this is a bug in Fiber. Maybe this is a bug in the product that is making some assumptions about how lifecycle hooks works or something like this that changed slightly in Fiber or something like this. But running these, like running two versions of the tech at the same time lets us make conscious decisions when we think it's actually ready to be deployed. Like if it's not tanking the metrics, it's probably okay.
So what was that?
We're getting there.
You said, was it 80% of users
Fiber,
currently
yeah.
putting on fiber? You heard it here first, folks. Maybe, probably not.
Hopefully your Facebook still works. If it doesn't, that might be my fault. But
Yeah, let these guys know if your Facebook doesn't work.
haven't seen any TechCrunch stories yet. So
So why Facebook BigPipe is not so popular as it should be? Could you also explain BigPipe?
yeah,
Before we
BigPipe is technology that our sort of web speed or static resources team developed, which is a mechanism for how the server sends the page down to the client in a way that we can split the page up into chunks and prioritize those chunks. And so as a concrete example, when you go to facebook.com, the most important things for you to see are first the blue bar at the top of the page, second, what we call the composer, where you can write a status, and then third is the first story in your newsfeed. And each of those has some HTML associated with it, as well as some JavaScript and some CSS. And we would like to load them in that order and as efficiently as possible as we can overall, but getting each thing onto the screen as soon as we can. And so instead of sending down all the HTML and then at the end of the page a bunch of CSS and JavaScript tags, we sort of interleave them and have, we actually send it down in HTML comment tags and then read the values of those comment tags because somebody benchmarked browser HTML parsers and found that was the quickest way to send down a giant blob of data. And then we add things into the page. And so I'd say it's not as popular as, maybe I'll say as it could be, because it's very complex and it might shave off 100 milliseconds or a few hundred milliseconds off of your page load time, but it's so complex that probably doesn't make it worth it unless you have a very high traffic website like we do. We actually, we've built abstractions so that most people building Facebook don't need to think about this, but they're all tied to our PHP or hack-based server stack, and so we haven't open sourced them because nobody uses those languages, and they wouldn't end up used. But I would say that as we are moving more towards client-rendered apps, such as using React and even controlling more exactly when resources get downloaded using things like service workers and the resource prioritization APIs, we're going to get to the point where you can have basically the same benefits entirely in client code, where perhaps you can split your JavaScript bundle and then prioritize loading the certain pieces in the order that you need them so that the most important pieces of your page can be displayed first.
Who would win in a fight? All four of you or Mark Zuckerberg?
This one is super obvious. Mark would very clearly win that fight.
That guy's got some guns. I think.
Yeah, Mark is one of the most competitive people I've ever met. One time at a Q&A, and somebody hopped up and asked Mark how many push-ups he could do, and his answer was more than you, which was great. And then so they're like, all right, you're on. And then I don't remember exactly what the bar was, but they set like this many number of push-ups in a year. And like it was like an insane amount. Like I don't remember what it was, but Zuck won. He did more push-ups. And anytime anyone has ever challenged him to anything where he has taken it seriously, which is usually, he tends to win because he's extremely driven and focused and has that like competitive spirit. Also, look at us. We're like, all right, by a show of hands of all the people on the stage, how many have ever been in a fight at all? My follow-up question was going to be, and won, but I don't even have to ask that.
Has Mark?
I have no idea, but I'm sure that if he was, that he won.
I mean, that's a good answer. I guess that those kind of super-driven Type A personalities end up creating giant Silicon Valley companies, it turns out.
I have no idea if those are, I mean, certainly the competitive aspect has helped him in that respect. That's true.
This next question has been fighting for position for a while. When would you guys not use React?
So actually, when we open source React, like all of the comments on Hacker News was Angular, 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 Angular. I have never heard of Angular before. So I was like, well, I should probably like learn Angular. So I think like when like people tell me like, oh, Angular and Vue, like I usually like not use React because I want to like see what they're talking about.
I'll give a slightly more positive answer too. I think that frameworks like Angular and Ember and Vue, which has also been gaining a lot of popularity recently, are really great frameworks, and they very much intentionally, I mean, they make some different choices with regard to like templates versus components in JavaScript, but they also, I think a more meaningful difference is the stance they take with building an entire framework and ecosystem versus just having a single library and then relying on the community for a lot of the other pieces. And I think that there's some cases when you want each one. I think that probably in another life, React could have also been one of these frameworks that handles view logic as well as data fetching and routing and everything else. But it's not. But I always like to see how those other frameworks are doing, and I think I would be happy using any of them if I was asked to.
Yeah, I think I agree with Ben, and I kind of feel like if I had to write like a CRUD application with like standard kind of forms and this kind of stuff, maybe I'd just use like a server-side framework like Django and not bother with client-side and all this complexity. But if I wanted to have control over, like more control over how it looks and like customize everything, then I'd probably go with React.
I actually think in general we still are biased too heavily towards doing work on the client. Yeah. I'm sure everyone in here has like a modern mobile phone and like probably either the latest Apple laptop or like a really high quality laptop from somebody else. Not everyone has those things, and so we tend to get a warped view of performance. Every once in a while, you'll see someone get loud on Twitter about how this is important, but I'm sure if you work at a company where you ship products to people who use real machines, that you know how much this is important. So all the time, we're thinking of places where we can actually take React out of the hot path in order to make critical performance things faster. So I would say anytime UI performance in terms of getting pixels drawn on screen as fast as possible is the goal, rather than client-side interactivity as the goal. So good examples like newsfeed on Facebook. There are aspects of that are user interactable, but we lazily load them in late, and a lot of those actually aren't even with React. The vast majority of that stuff is server rendered, and not React server rendered, but instead with like super tuned server-side rendering frameworks that we've built at Facebook to get the first pixels on the screen as quickly as possible, Big Pipe being one part of making that work. Especially as we build stuff that needs to target super low-end devices, low-end Android devices, things like that. Anytime that you don't really need React to solve the problem, certainly give it two thinks as to whether you could do it with server-side rendering, something super minimal, and just, as always, measure before you ship stuff.
Cool. The next question is amazingly specific. It shows how kind of switched on and in tune our audience are. So will Fiber's priorities be exposed as an API? If so, can we set priority to 0 after first render to prevent re-rendering of constant elements?
I would say that, well, two things. One, as much as possible, we want to set the priorities for you automatically so that you don't need to think about it in most cases. Like in the example I said where you have some text input or some animation, ideally React can just realize that that's what you're doing and prioritize those updates versus others. We will probably also have some API to specify that priority of a specific state update. So like when you call set state, basically, you would specify it in some way. You'd say this is a high priority update or this is a low priority update. And if it's a low priority update, that means that it'll wait for other high priority updates if there are any. For the second half of this question, can we set priority to 0? You can already add a should component update false, which does, I think, basically this. React also has a built-in bailout case where if you have the exact same React element object and it's triple equals, then React will also skip recursing into that subtree. And so either of those can work. But in terms of lowering priorities automatically in a broader sense, we also are hoping to deprioritize work that is off-screen or hidden. So if you have some element that is display none and it has a lot of complex children, then it's probably less important that we render that than things that the user is actually interacting with. Or even if something is below the fold on the page and it's not scrolled onto the screen yet, then perhaps we can defer that work a little bit in favor of making the visible UI more responsive. And so we're going to be exploring a lot of those different possibilities over time.
Good answer. I think this question I accidentally skipped a couple of questions back, so I'm glad it's back. What's the next big thing in React after Fiber? You haven't even got 100% on Fiber.
Apparently animations,
yeah.
Given the
It's
386 votes.
It's the diagram lead, yeah.
But I think, Fiber is not an event. It is like a half of our future,
It's
right?
wrong.
It's like, yeah, we're just getting started with Fiber. The first step is to try to cut over to that new code base. But at Facebook, we don't even have any of the new features enabled yet in the build we're using. And so first, we want to be able to switch over to the new code, which we're very close to now. And we want to feel confident that that works so that we can just delete the old code, forget about it forever. And then we have this new stable core that we can build on top of. And so we'll start by enabling some of these new features, building in a lot of these this asynchronous functionality and priorities. And then we'll also, and then after that, we'll look towards more things that we can build that will really help people. There was a question up there earlier that fell off the screen a little bit about layout and coroutines, and that's some, it's like a research project for us basically, where we're trying to figure out some, like, what if we had some new capabilities for components to communicate with each other? What could you build? And that's something that our new architecture makes easier. And so Fiber's not a box on a checklist. It's at least for now the entire future of React. And so I just named a few things that we're planning to do in the next couple years, but Fiber will never be done, probably.
Also, Fiber is a re-implementation and enable all those things like the new renderers. Like there was a talk after this before, and there's also a lot of interesting things going on in the React VR space. And what's interesting is React, when it started, was given to web developers, and they did crazy things with it. And then now with React Native, a lot of native iOS and Android people are doing crazy things with it. And now we are getting actual game developers using it. And one thing I've learned recently in our internal group is someone built a high order component for game network synchronization. And you're like, okay, well, those game developers are super high into these kind of things. Or other thing is how do you build shaders using React? And how do you get like super fine like 3D control over the scene? How do you actually render text on a curvature? And like all of those things that are like use cases that we haven't needed in the web community, like those people in the game industry like have spent like decades like improving on. And now I'm super interested to see like what are the application of those game like things into React is going to be.
So we've got a few more minutes and 148 questions to answer. So you guys are fine to just stay here, right? Be fine, you know, lock the doors. So, oh man, it's changing quick. I like this question. What could we learn from the latest versions of Vue.js and Angular?
So I think one thing we've learned from Vue.js is like their documentation like is really, really, really good. Like if you have never like written any website in your life before, or like you're not even a programmer, you can just read there, like it introduces, oh, copy and paste this, and this, and you've got a working thing. And this has been a huge inspiration for like the new rewrite of the docs. And so we basically like took like all of the sections that they had and see like does it make sense in React, and mostly like adapted them to the React website. So this is one of the examples where like we can actually like as a community like not only React but like as a broader community like take good things from each other.
One thing that I've been really impressed with Angular is how much they've been able to do with ahead of time compilation. It's something that, you know, the only thing we do in React with ahead of time compilation is turn JSX back into JavaScript. But I think there's huge opportunities to be able to write React components in a way such that they are statically analyzable, and then when we can statically analyze them, find opportunities to leave behind hints for the runtime to be able to do smarter and more performant things. It's been like constantly a back of mind experiment for us, and I know Sebastian McKenzie, as soon as he came into Facebook, had like a whole bunch of really cool ideas on how to use Babel to help with that and use it as a generalized optimizer compiler, not just a transforming compiler. So that is something that I think Angular in particular proved that you can do it really well and you can get a lot of awesome performance benefits out of it. So I think we can probably learn from them.
And Ember, Glimmer as well.
Yep.
I also wanted to give a shout out to Ember. So I think in June last year, I attended EmberConf in London. And like a lot of people were talking about how easy it is to get started with Ember, how Ember CLI is awesome. So this was one of the like big inspirations for me and Christopher to work on Great React App. And like it's not as fully fledged as Ember CLI. It doesn't do a lot of things that Ember CLI can do. But I think it's an example where Ember community has done a great job, and we try to learn from them.
So I think actually our clock's a couple of minutes behind. So I'm going to do, we're going to take one more question from the board, and then I'll throw in another one of my own. So another specific one. Ben said at ReactConf 2016, that people remember, that in the future, components will be aware of layout during render. Dan mentioned that coroutines are needed first. Any updates on this?
Well, there's an internal API that kind of works. There are like maybe 5 tests written for it, but we'll see. But basically the idea is that, as you know, in React currently, if you have a parent and a child component, there is only one way of like communication, which is that the parent can pass a prop to the child component, and the output of the child component is something that like gets embedded into the parent, so to say. So the parent, we can have a model, and inside it there can be a button, and so React figures out, okay, this button actually renders to this blob of DOM, and it inserts it at the right place. But there is no way for the child to say, like, hey, I have these properties, like, I don't know, I have these height and width or something like this, and tell that to the parent so that it can lay out the children, for example. So this is something that Ben mentioned, that this is like a research area. It might not work out. But we've added a mechanism for child and parent communication so that the parent can pass some data to the child can pass some data back, and then the parent can pass, continue rendering the children with that information. And it could be used to implement something like Flexbox in the user space. So we're not sure we're going to use it. We're not sure if it's going to be part of the public API or not. But it's in there. If you know how to access internals, you can try it in alphas.
Yeah, one of the things around this is performance. Like layout is actually like one of the big chunk of like rendering something. And so when I was working on CSS layout, the first thing like I tried is like to use the JavaScript version of it. And like it was like 2 or 3 times slower than the C version of it. So JavaScript right now, like you're able to like write like really like fast mass like operation like layout, but it's still like way slower like when you're like talking about like a second render. Like so I would like be like aware of this, and especially like within Fiber, not only are you going to do like pure math, but you're also going to like create objects and like communicate between the parent and the child. So those are like the things that are interesting for Facebook, because like those are like the things we cannot actually ship in practice, because like we have like so much higher standard of like performance than like the like normal app. But this is like where like one thing where like the community like can be like super useful is like all of your random projects like side project, or all of your like small like website or like super interactive or art or whatever, like those are like really good use case to like experiment, and we've seen like so many innovation come from this from the community. So.
All right, so I think that's pretty much all we got time for. I'm going to drop in one very quick question for you just to finish off. I'm sure there are loads of people in this room just like me who would love to be able to help more with the open source projects that you have. So just quickly, like, what's the sort of best way for people to kind of get a good introduction to React or any other project to help out? And 2, are there any other projects out there outside of React that are just screaming out for help that this community could help out with?
There are always projects that need help, and they always need lots of it. So I spent a lot of time with people in school who want to become part of the open source community as like a mentor or whatever. And the 2 pieces of advice that I always give is start by contributing to documentation, and start by helping to manage issues. Because those 2 things are typically the hardest to do. They get the least attention. Everyone wants to come in and like add new features to the thing. Don't add new features to React. It's like that's something that is, you know, we spend tons of time and attention and planning on any even small change to React. We're like, oh, I'm gonna go fix a bug. Cool. If you find a task open that has a bug, then go fix it. But like, what are you gonna do? Go look to like find a bug in the first place? But documentation is constantly the thing that everyone's griping about isn't good enough. So start there. And it sounds small, but it means that if any change that you make to documentation for the better means that everybody who comes behind you will be able to learn it that much easier. And then when they contribute to the docs, everyone who comes behind them will learn that much easier as well. We're also in a blind spot as maintainers because we understand this stuff inside and out, and it's not always clear to us what the best way to teach someone about this is. However, it's always my view that the best way to learn is to teach, because by going through the learning process yourself, you know exactly what critical understanding you had in order to understand a concept. And if you can then kind of strategically place that in the documentation such that the next person who comes along understands that concept better than you, that's massively valuable. Similar with maintaining issues. So if you go through and find issues where people are asking questions, answer their questions and help close the issues out, or if an issue is highlighting a bug, to make sure you're following up those people to ask for a clear reproduction case. You know, can you send a pull request with a test that fails, stuff like that. It's kind of the mechanical stuff that it can get really overwhelming as soon as a project gets popular, which means that a lot of us end up maintaining projects where we're like the one person behind it. I know, Dan, you're like the one person behind multiple projects now. And I know we've like talked about this before, but eventually the issues kind of stack up and you're like, oh, I'm on vacation. And it's like you come back, oh no, going on vacation didn't make the issues stop, it made it worse. And the same, like when you asked me before about Immutable.js, I asked for help. Like the thing I needed help with was there's so many issues in pull requests, I don't even know how to start getting in and digging out of this mess that we're in. So that's always massively helpful when people can come in and just help organize. Like this is the most important thing for you to focus on next is the maintainer. Okay, great, sweet, thanks for your help. So those two things are really important. In terms of projects that need help, there's tons of stuff in the community. So if you talk to any one of the companies that are here that build stuff in the open source environment with React, great places to help. There's the Facebook open source projects. If you go github.com/Facebook, there's tons and tons and tons of stuff there. It's always my opinion that you should contribute to projects that you are using yourself to make stuff, just to make sure there's really clear incentive alignment so that the time that you're spending on something kind of directly impacts everything that you're doing, not just that one project. But I would say basically any project that's out there always needs help with something.
Cool. Well, thank you very much, guys. That'd be nice to wrap it up. And thank you for your questions, everybody. Massive thanks to our panel.